Step one in fundraising is knowing your own organization. What are your impacts? What are your capabilities? So by capabilities, I mean, what do you have to offer? What difference can you make? Who do you have in your team? And what can they do? What are they able to do? And how can you support them and resource them to do what they want to do? It could also be, you're a makerspace. We have a space. Let's use it. That's a capability. You have all of these machines. You can use them somehow to make something, to help someone, to have an impact. So what are your capabilities and what impact do you have? Or what impact could you have? Making and makerspaces have an enormous range of impacts. They can be from fixing a broken bicycle, to creating a job, to helping with mental health problems, to reducing conflict between different communities and different people, to educational benefits, to vocational skills and training, to humanitarian purposes and assisting refugees, helping in a pandemic. The range of impacts that a makerspace can have can be enormous. And that makes it complicated and complex. It may not be entirely what your business model is about, and you might have several business models, but really knowing your own organization, your capabilities, and your impacts is really the first step. I would advise that you don't stretch too far from your capabilities and your impacts. So if you have never done prosthetics and orthotics before, and you don't have someone on your team or someone in your network that knows how to do prosthetics and orthotics, then maybe you shouldn't be doing prosthetics and orthotics 3D printing. If you have never done if you've never had an impact in, say, plastic recycling before, maybe you shouldn't be applying for plastic recycling. Now, it depends. If it's an innovation fund and you want to do something new, or it's a small grant and you want to try something out, absolutely apply for it, go for it. But if it's a larger grant, where the donor is going to be assessing your past experience and understanding your capabilities, and they look at it and go, well, this person's never done plastic recycling before, why are they applying for this? You're going to have to make a really good case to be able to win that grant, a really strong case why you're going to try something new with more programmatic funding as opposed to prototyping or innovation funding. So don't stretch too far beyond your existing capabilities and existing impacts. But of course, fundraising is an opportunity to build those capabilities and expand those impacts. So it is a balancing act between pushing out further, maintaining your work, but also not going too far. The next, let me just click on this. Know what your strengths are. If you're really good at making things, lean into that. If you're really good at education and training, lean into that. If you're really good at bringing communities together, focus on that. So really work on what your strengths are. And your strengths can be you as an individual, the makers in your makerspace. Look, we've got, 5 young women here who've all learned how to use laser cutters. Let's find a project or some funding that supports them. Know what your strengths are and build on those. Mind the gaps. mind the gaps in your budget. If you know that a grant is coming to an end at the end of the year, you need to be thinking about what's going to happen next year. If you know that your existing grant doesn't cover, say, the chief executive's salary, the makerspace manager's full salary, you've got a gap in the budget where you've got to fill the rest of that gap in the makerspace manager's or the chief executive's salary. Mind the gap in cash flow. A lot of donors, and it makes me really mad, but a lot of donors don't like to pay money up front. They will pay you after you have incurred the expense. And the bigger the grant, the more you have to incur to be able to claim the money back. So I was working with some makerspaces in Iraq for a number of years. They got to about spending about $1 million every 8 months. They were training thousands and thousands and thousands of people and doing all sorts of things. And there were big fancy spaces all over the country. So they were spending nearly $1 million every 8 months. But the donor would only really pay in arrears, which meant that there was a cash flow problem. It got that, we needed to find about $250,000 in cash up front before the donor paid us back that money because we were claiming in arrears. And we came to a compromise trying to sort it out, but $250,000 in cash, where are you going to find that from? So mind the gap, know your own organization and its cash flow, but also mind the gaps in your capacity. So if you are a makerspace manager, you are probably not a project manager. You can manage projects, sure. But if it's a big project, you are probably going to need a full-time project manager, because the makerspace manager has to be busy running the makerspace and some of the other activities that you might be doing in your space. Have a think about your capacity and mind those gaps as well. You can always use fundraising as an opportunity to fill those gaps. And you have to make choices to make sure that you're not artificially creating gaps. Don't forget to put the makerspace manager's salary in the budget. Don't forget to put, if you're doing something on plastic recycling, please remember to put a plastic recycling expert in the budget. Don't create false gaps in capacity. But yeah, one of the things about knowing your organization is you have to mind the gap. It's best to think 6 months ahead. Most organizations I've been involved in don't have money in 6 months' time. A lot of grants can be 2 or 3 years, but in those situations, it doesn't fully fund your organization. It only funds part of it. So in most organizations I've been in, you're out of cash in 6 months' time, and you need to find a way to fill that gap. So you have to be quite tactical sometimes. But ideally, you're thinking programmatically, you're thinking strategically, and you're able to think 2 years ahead. So you can start looking for 2 or 3 year programs, or you can begin to cultivate relationships with foundations and trusts that could potentially last years. And a really important part of knowing your organization is recognizing who you know. Who does your organization know? Who does the founder of your organization know? Who does the maker who comes in every Friday afternoon after college? Who do they know? Think about those sorts of opportunities. I'm the chairman of Fab Lab Winham, and one of the people that Fab Lab Winham knows is the governor's wife. And the governor of that state is interested in education and technical vocation. So how do we find out about it? Well, try and figure out how to keep in touch with the governor's wife. Invite her to events and things. Think about who you want to work with. You may not have any opportunities to do so yet, but if there's somebody really exciting, a really interesting organization, perhaps a new startup, perhaps an international organization that you're excited by, perhaps a local university or school, or a local technology company, think about who you want to work with. Maybe it's a nearby hospital, maybe it's a nearby prison, maybe it's a nearby refugee camp. Think about who you want to work with and network with them. And this is quite important. Invest in getting your organization ready, because for the larger grants, if you don't have good financial systems, say separate bank signatories, more than one bank signatory on the bank account, or you don't have 3, 4, 5 years worth of accounts that have either been independently reviewed or perhaps independently audited. If you don't have that, you need to invest a little bit, perhaps using some of the money that we've sent you to your makerspaces to get your organization ready. So if your turnover last year was, say, $50,000 or $25,000, perhaps in your country you don't need to do an independent review of your accounts. But if you don't have that independent review of your accounts, you might not be eligible for a grant. So perhaps you should use that money to ask an accountant to do an independent review of your accounts. And that way you've got some. So the next time a donor asks you, you can provide it. Invest in getting your organization ready can mean all sorts of things. It can mean structure, it can mean management, it can mean coming on training like this. But it often comes down to due diligence and compliance issues. Invest in getting to know your donors. So, this is taking time to travel, to attend events, to get out into the world and meet people, basically. And whether these donors are identified or not identified, but try and figure out how to get to know them a little bit. And I'm not talking about becoming friends with them. That can cause problems. But it's a little bit about developing an understanding of not only what are they interested in and what excites them and what's important to the people who fund them, because a lot of donors are just handling other people's money. I'm also talking about finding out what's coming next. They're doing a strategy review, and climate change is going to be a big part of their new strategy. Get to know your donors. And this is something you should spend money on. So again, with this capacity building module, we've given you some money. Perhaps you need to go to the capital city and meet somebody. Or perhaps you need to clean up the space a bit and invite a number of people to come and visit the space and to have a look around. And you can, invite them to come and visit. You can use, you need to invest and spend money on getting to know your donors. And I want to say something right at the beginning of this training, and it's really important. And I think it's not something that a lot of people recognize. People know that money is power. Well, the people who decide what an organization does are often the fundraisers. The fundraisers really are the ones who decide what an organization does. Oh, hi there. Can you mute, please? Thank you. Okay. And if you could switch your video off as well. Thank you. There's we're back on Umi's phone, I think, connecting it on and off. It's really fundraisers who decide what an organization does, because they're the ones that write the budgets, and they're the ones who design the projects. So please take care and be considerate, because perhaps you work in a bigger organization. We have a makerspace here that's part of the Kenyan Red Cross, or part of an educational institution, DTI. And perhaps there are other people in the organization who do fundraising, and maybe that takes power away from you to decide how you want to do things. But maybe it's an opportunity for you to engage with them, become friends with the fundraisers in those departments, and then they can do the work for you. I think part of the role of a fundraiser is about respecting people's privacy and confidentiality, because there could be moments where you find out how much somebody earns, or you find out problems in a partner organization that are quite sensitive, because you're trying to design a project together and actually maybe they're in a bit of a pickle. So privacy and confidentiality is important. You have to be discreet as well. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about the value of being open, but not every organization has that, and not every culture has that. But yeah, remember, fundraisers have a lot of power to decide what an organization does. And yeah, it's, you know, if you're fundraising yourself, you're taking that power for yourself. Be careful how to manage that and to respect it.